Hello my lovely friends, it's Margaret, and it is time to talk about my favorite books of 2020. Welcome to day 12 of the 12 Days of Margaret. Like I said, today we are going to be talking about the book that I loved most from 2020. A couple things before we get started. If you have watched any of my monthly wrap-ups, we're actually not going to be talking about a lot of my favorite books of the month, because the thing about that is a lot of them end up being rereads for me. So in my favorites video, it always has to be a new book to me, something that I've read for the first time that I want other people to read. In addition, this is my personal taste. This is like what I like, and so some of these books you might sit there and go, Margaret, is that really the best book of 2020? And I'm going to say, well, here's the thing. These are the top 10 books that I want people to read from what I read in 2020. These are the books that brought me the most joy, that were not rereads. These are the books that just made me happy. So just, question my reading tastes if you like, but these are the books that I enjoyed the most. So for the first time in my booktube history, we actually have some nonfiction that has made it onto this list. This has been a very good year for me with nonfiction, and a lot of it is because I have been reading nonfiction books that I am, they're things that I am interested in, things that I really want to know more about, and so it's really worked out. The first one that I want to mention is The Color of Law, The Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America by Richard Rothstein. This is just basically an overview from the early 1900s until present day, or when this book was published, which is in 2016, of how we have come to have a country that is so segregated. If you don't know, most of our neighborhoods, especially when it comes to black and white, are still very segregated. Despite the fact that segregation is illegal, we still have majority black neighborhoods and majority white neighborhoods in our country, and that is by design, which this book does go into. And because of the way that it was designed, it is very hard to get any mobility out of those black neighborhoods. This was really well structured, I felt. He really had a good idea of how to handle each of these topics, because it's not the history just from beginning to end. He actually breaks it down into different factors that led to the segregation of America. Now, he talks about public housing, and he talks about racial zoning, and how the idea of like when that big push to own your own home started in the 40s, how that was specifically aimed at white Americans, trying to get them to move out of cities and segregate is the word, neighborhoods, and create white suburbs. There is so much that is in our history and so much in law that actually contributed to making sure that black Americans stayed in only specific approved spots. I think this is a very important topic. I think this is something that we need to be aware of, we need to be paying attention to, because if we don't know what's happened, if we don't know the full history of what's happened, and a lot of this is glossed over in the history books. He does mention that. There's a section at the end where he talks about how it's talked about in history books. If we don't know these things, we don't have the people who are willing to change them. That's part of why we have so much stuff that has been carried forward, is because we are so unwilling to change it. And I think a lot of this information just makes you think and makes you question kind of where you come from, what you've been raised in. The next book on this list is White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide by Carol Anderson. I actually found this book because I have one of her, well, I'm not going to go get that, but I have one of her other books, which is not One Person, No Vote, and it talks about voting suppression in the United States. This is more of a comprehensive history. This starts at the very beginning of the Reconstruction, when the Black Code started, and it goes all the way, I think, to the 2016. I want to say it's the same kind of time period or earlier. Yeah, so it starts at the beginning of Reconstruction, goes into the Black Codes, goes into why we have so many vagrancy laws, which racism is to blame for that, and then it goes forward. And she covers, this one is broken into 5 different parts, and it just is very comprehensive, and it doesn't go in depth into every single one, but it covers a lot of information, and it covers it in a way that is very, very accessible. There was very little that I felt I needed to reread to understand what I was reading. So this was written to be accessible to people. It was not written for the academic. It's written for people to read and be educated. I highly, highly, highly recommend this book if you are looking to kind of understand more of the United States racial history and how we got where we were, and how just deep and embedded some of the anti-blackness in this country is. You need to read this. Right now we are moving on to fiction, which is the primary, the bulk of what I read. The first one I want to mention is Before the Devil Breaks You by Libba Bray. I'm gonna be honest, it is not so It is tied for favorite in the series with King of Crows. However, I couldn't say King of Crows, number one, because I don't actually own it yet, and number two, because I do have to admit, Before the Devil Breaks You is much better written than King of Crows is. King of Crows has serious pacing issues. I think all of the issues that I had with that book, all of the things that should have made it less than 5 stars for me, would have been fixed if we had cut out a little bit at the middle, and added that to the ending so that we were building towards that ending. This is the third book in the Diviner series. The Diviner starts out in the 1920s with Evie O'Neill, and she has the power to touch objects and see things about the person who owned that object. And she finds out that she is what is called a diviner. There are many of them. They have various powers, and this book just kind of follows her and a couple of other diviners that she meets along the way, trying to figure out what's going on, because there's something really spooky and scary. It is very dark. It's very creepy. It's like a mystery thriller type series, but also historical. I absolutely adore that combination. It's amazing. But like I said, I do think this is the best written book in the series. It has some of my favorite moments between the main couple. Like, my favorite moments are all in the last book, but it does have some of my favorite moments between the main, or my main couple, because this is a really big ensemble cast book, and she does that so well, the way she builds through the first 2 books to add all of those characters in. She does that so well, so organic. When they come together, it's like, oh, you've been waiting for this, and it's just like such this catharsis and release. You're like, yes, finally everyone is in the same room. She does not hold punches. For a book that was written by a white author, I felt like she really knew what she was talking about when she goes into this historical context, because she was hitting on issues that I think a lot of people and a lot of history books don't know happened, or ignore that happened, or have forgotten that have happened. So I think she just really hit it on the nail, and she goes in. She goes in when she's discussing those issues. Maybe not as much as you could in a nonfiction or something, but because this obviously is fiction, but she goes into them to some extent. Another thing I love the main couple. What I consider the main couple. For me, I actually think this book has one of my, and as someone who does not like sex scenes, this has one of my favorites in it, and it is purely because of how much agency the woman has in that scene, and how certain things that I think guys normally would get upset about happening in that scene, the male love interest does not. He just like, oh, okay. I don't want to spoil it, but I'm just like, he handles it so well, and I'm just like, we need more examples of boys having this attitude to this thing, and not like being mad because they felt like they were led on. I will also say that this does have a near rape in it, so if you have problems with that, just approach it cautiously. Speaking of me not really liking sex scenes in books, let's talk about Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. I loved this book so much. It's so wonderful and sweet and wholesome, and I just enjoyed the romance. There were questions that I had about some of the things they thought were appropriate in places that were public. Just, okay. I personally would not have been comfortable with that, but okay. This is a super fun rom-com. It's about Chloe Brown, and she has a near-death experience, and that near-death experience pushes her to decide that she's gonna strike out on her own, and she's got this bucket list, or this list of things that she wants to make sure she has accomplished to completely overhaul her life. She realizes that she has just had a very sheltered, very same life, and part of that is because she does have a chronic illness. I can't remember what it was. I want to say fibromyalgia. I really appreciated how I was able to relate to her on the chronic illness level. We have 2 completely different chronic illnesses, but there were definitely moments where I was like, oh yeah, I recognize that family reaction, or oh yeah, I've dealt with that situation. Now, it doesn't incapacitate me the way that Chloe's does, because she is quite often just can't do things because of all of the pain, but it was a nice kind of thing to be like, yeah, I've had this experience in some of the places where she's having to kind of navigate the world, while also thinking about the fact that, like, there are things my body can't do. There are things that, I feel like I should be able to do, but I can't necessarily do. I also thought that this is one of those situations where the miscommunication trope was done really well. Like that 3rd act breakup that you have in books, in romances, really done well, because they had built up to that point so well. It's complicated, there are spoilers involved, but it was built up to that point in a way that made it very believable that this would have been the reaction and the fight that they had. I also liked the fact that it does show trauma in a male character, and that it was really very much like anti-toxic masculinity, which I have found that all of Talia Hibbert's books that I've read have been, which I appreciate in fiction. I love books that are like toxic masculinity. We're not doing that here. Just, it makes me happy. The second book, really, the Get a Life, Dani Brown, really does dive into that a little bit more. I enjoyed that one slightly less than I enjoyed this one, because the plot in this one is not as dependent on the sex scenes, and it is very dependent in Dani Brown. It's okay. All right, I think this is the first 4-star book that I've had on this list. By the way, these are in no particular order, but yeah, except for like the last 3. Those are my 3 favorite books. They are in fact in order, but like for the most part, these are in no particular order. They're just like books I wanted to talk about, and I grouped them in ways that seem to make sense. So I want to talk about Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. No, this is not just on that list because she has the same name as I am, or because I keep using this to comp to my book. So this is about Elizabeth, and she is in this great library, and in her world there are certain books called grimoires, and these grimoires, if they get damaged, they turn into monsters that attack people, and Elizabeth ends up getting framed when one of the most dangerous grimoires ends up killing the warden at her library. Now, Elizabeth's biggest ambition is to be one of these wardens and to take care of these books because she absolutely adores them, and then she ends up having to team up with a sorcerer in order to prove her innocence. However, she's been raised to think that sorcerers, who are the ones that create the grimoires, are like the height of evil. And we go from there. So, this book, I absolutely adored the romance. Just, like, it was that perfect, like, mix of them kind of being attracted to each other, but also kind of not liking each other at the beginning, and then learning more about each other as they go, and I just enjoyed that so much. Also, Silas. Silas was so much fun as a character. I was so happy to have him in this book, and I'm not going to go into too much of it, but oh man. I felt like Elizabeth was very relatable despite the fact that she is much taller than I am. I hear that it's really nice to have tall girl rep, and it's very good tall girl rep if you're looking for that. She is a bookworm, and I related to that, and she also frequently is at odds with the male gender, and I am also frequently at odds with the guys that I like because I don't know how to handle feelings. Anyways, and then the other thing that I really liked about this is that it felt like historical fiction, even though it's in a completely made up fantasy world. There were parts of it that I sat and I went, this is based on actual things that happened in Victorian times, in Victorian England. I was just, like, it felt like that. The way that Elizabeth is treated as she's trying to fight against the fact that they think she has done this thing and she's trying to clear her name, they treat her the way women were treated. She is declared hysterical and all of that stuff. And I just was like, ooh, yes, this is one of those where she overcomes the patriarchy. And I just like stories where you see, like, there is misogyny, but we get to see the main character overcome it. That makes me feel just fulfilled as a person. So the next book that we need to talk about is Slay by Brittany Morris. Oh my gosh, guys, this book was so good. Like, it grabs you at the beginning and you are just trapped. I loved the way I should tell you what this book is about. So this is about Kira. She is a black teenage girl who was tired of not seeing herself in all of the fantasy video games that she liked to play, and so she decided that she was going to create her own video game that was based around black culture. Now, it is a very exclusive video game. You have to have an invite code to get into it, so that was kind of her way of not necessarily gatekeeping, but protecting herself and protecting the players who played that game, so you don't have to worry about any racist white people getting in there. However, there's an actual murder in real life that happens over this game, and so the game is thrown into the spotlight, and now people are questioning whether or not it's okay for her to have this video game that is basically kind of a safe space for black teens and other black gamers. I'm sure it comes to no surprise to you where I land on that question. I really, really liked this, and part of the, I read this in February, I'm still not over the thing that happens that I can't tell you because it will spoil, and then you'll figure it out, and I want you to go in and not know that that's gonna happen, and so I can't tell you, but oh my gosh, that was done so well. She bamboozled me so thoroughly. I was so certain that I knew what was happening, and then I didn't, and I just... Anyways, I was super invested in this book. It just draws you in, and the way she structures the narrative, I don't want to get too much into it, but the way that the narrative is structured, I was just like enthralled by it. It's not a typical like one narrator narrative structure. You get to see Kira, you get to see another character or person that she developed the game with or is helping her develop the game, and then we get snippets from other players, so we're getting to see the impact this game has had on other black people who play it. It is really, really character driven. I know there are some maybe issues with the world building. I've heard kind of people pick apart kind of some of how Kira is able to do what she does, but like, I don't care about that. I cared about the characters and Kira's journey, and all of that just made this book so worthwhile and so enthralling and so good. It hits you, it's emotional, and I wanted to protect this child with my life. I could not talk about my favorite reads of 2020 without mentioning On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. So this is about Brie. Her father was a rapper, but he died when she was very, very young. He was shot. She has grown up wanting to be a rapper just like her father. She gets unfairly profiled one day at school by the security guard, and so she writes a rap about it that's expressing her feelings and how she feels and, you know, the anger that that gives her. And people take a lot of that song out of context. A lot of this book is Brie grappling with the impact her words have had and how it's being twisted, and how she wishes people would actually pay attention to how she's actually saying. My favorite part of this book is the dynamic of Brie's family. Granted, there were a few people in her family that made me want to just be like, can we sit down, have a discussion about this, because you are not behaving. But Brie and her mom and her brother, I just loved the interplay between them. There was a place, specifically a place. Like, I was in stitches when they interacted, like 90% of the time that they interacted, but there was one specific place where I'm out on my daily walk, being normal, and there are people walking around me, and I probably scared the bejesus out of this poor woman ahead of me, because she probably didn't know that there was anyone behind her until I laughed out loud at something that happened. Also, Brie's rapping was so good. Like, I'm like, oh, I actually maybe need to get into rap music. This is really, really good. And I listened to it as an audiobook, so you kind of got some of that performative aspect of what she was doing. But she is clever, and Angie Thomas can write. Like, I knew Angie Thomas can write, but like, she can write. I also really loved Brie as a character herself. She is very nerdy, and I felt a kinship with that because, come on, I'm a huge nerd as well. It is in the title of my channel for a reason. It's because I'm a huge nerd. I just liked how this followed Brie and how it was both deep and hard-hitting, but also light and fun in places. The balance that Angie Thomas is able to hit between having books that will really hit you hard, but will also make you laugh. She just is a genius, a master at doing that. Right, now it is time to get to my top 3 books of the year. These are the books that have brought me the most joy. These are the books that I have not been able to stop thinking about. These are the books that I'm like, when somebody asks, what is a good book that you read this year? These are the books that the next 2 are the ones that I recommend the most. My favorite, I don't necessarily, because I know that it's very, very subjective to my tastes and it having things in it that I appreciate, and me being completely bamboozled by the romance and not so much about some of the flaws in the book. So there are definite flaws in this series. The first one I want to talk about is A Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is about Maggie Hosky. She is a monster hunter in the future, so we're in this kind of post-apocalyptic world where a great flood has come in, and most of the world is just a mess and a disaster. There's been a whole bunch of stuff, it's just fallen apart, but the Navajo Nation is still protected because these big walls came up. Navajo gods and legend have returned to walk the earth, and that is the world that Maggie inhabits and is a monster hunter in. And then one day she finds these monsters that she's like, wait, hold on, these are not the normal monsters that we get. Like, something is happening, somebody is actually doing things. I need to investigate this. I love this series. I've read the first 2 books. I need the 3rd book. I need the 3rd book, guys. Maggie Hosky is one of my favorite new characters. She is the strong female character trope done right, because she has so many layers. She is very belligerent. She is very angry and violent in places, but she also has that soft side. She is fully fleshed out as a character, and I love that. This is what people wish they were writing. It is what they wish they were writing when they're trying to do a strong female character. I don't think I've ever seen it done as well as Maggie Hosky. Obviously, love the romance because it's in my top 3 books of the year. It's got to have some romance in it, most likely, probably, unless, you know, it's a middle grade, we'll get there. But I also really liked the way, now I don't know, I can't verify, obviously, because I'm not an expert on Navajo mythology or Navajo legend, but I really liked how she worked that into the world, how she was able to bring these characters in and give me an idea of where they came from, kind of the basis of who they are, without me needing to be an expert, without me needing to have a basis and understand, like, the past. I am sure that that enriches what you are seeing in here, but I love that it's still very apparent on page without having to have that background. It is fun, it is creative, it is serious, it's just so many good things all wrapped into one, and it's nice short package if you're looking for a short read because there's so much that happens in here, but I feel like it was still really well paced and really well balanced. My second favorite book of the year was Other Words for Home by Jasmine Morgan. So this is about Judah, and she is from Syria, and her mother takes her and they move to live with family in the United States because of all of the unrest that is over in Syria. It's sweet, it's great. It is so heartwarming as a book. It's about her trying to fit in, but also still be true to herself and true to where she's come from and her culture, while also trying to like be part of her school play, even though her English is not the best yet. I just adored this book. This is the one from 2020 that I think I have recommended the most because I just think everyone needs to read this book. I did not think that this was going to make, like, I thought it was going to be good, but I didn't think it would make my favorites of 2020 just because it is a book in verse. And historically, those don't always hit as well with me, but I just, like, the way this was structured and the way it was told, I was like, I didn't feel like I needed to understand the structure of what was being said to truly understand what was being said. Judah herself is just a wonderful, sweet, adorable character, and I wanted to protect her with my whole heart. I was just, some of the things that happen in this book, I'm just like, she should not have to experience them. She should not have to deal with them. And they are things that happen when she comes to the United States, in case anyone's wondering about what those things are. This book, it's so complex and layered. It is about fitting in, it's about family, it's about homesickness. It almost had me crying. I was in my car with tears in my eyes. Like, that doesn't happen very often. You've heard that many times if you've been on my channel and heard me talk about this book. I'm not a big book crier, tears person, and yet here we are with me just choking on my emotions as the end of this book happened. If you were to read any of these books that I am recommending, and there are probably books on here that deserve me saying this more, but if you were to read any book on this list, read this one. Just read this one. So my favorite book of the year is going to be a slight surprise, but not all that surprising if you've been on my channel since, like, I think March or February or something like that, or had to listen to me yell at Christine, and that is going to be Calibans War by James S.A. Corey. You thought this was going to be Leviathan Wakes, didn't you? Listen, it's the Expanse series as a whole, because this series, both book and show, has brought me so much joy this year. It just came and it rescued me from other science fiction shows that let me down and I'm still mad about, but we're not going to get into that because that's not what this video is about. This is probably so far my favorite book of the ones I've read, and it's because it has two of my favorite characters from the series as the points of view. I'm not going to go into who they are or how they kind of fit into the narrative. I'm not even going to tell you what the Leviathan Wakes / The Expanse is about. All you need to know is it's kind of like a murder mystery in space, and there are zombies, and there's a virus, and a crew, and found family, and all of that good stuff. Like, you don't need to, like, just, there's too much for me to explain in a short synopsis. Just take that and go with it. So this is my favorite. I feel like Leviathan Wakes is a little bit harder to get through if you like, I don't know, diversity in your reading, because it is two male points of view, and one of them is not the most fun to get through and to read. Jim, however, is a cinnamon roll, and I love him, and nothing bad should ever happen to him, and yet here we are reading a book about bad things happening to him. This is some of the most accessible science fiction fantasy that I have ever read. They do such a good job of balancing plot and character with world building. The world building is there. The idea of what the future looks like is there. They're very thorough with it, but they do it in such a way that you're not sitting there going, okay, but this is boring. And that's part of the issue that I have with a lot of science fiction, is the world building just takes over the characters or the plot. Like, there's not always a balance. This, I felt, was really well balanced. It also has some characters that I just absolutely adore. I adore the entire crew of the Rocinante. Naomi is my favorite. I love her. She is amazing, and she makes me so happy that she exists. For a book that is written by two dudes, for a series that's written by two dudes, they actually do a really good job of writing Naomi as a female character. There wasn't a single moment where, in a bad way, I was like, this was definitely written by two dudes. There are a couple of moments in this book where I'm like, yeah, this definitely was written by a guy, because we weren't able to imagine space without a little bit of a misogyny. One of the characters mentions that she is the only woman in a room full of men, like a high-powered kind of gathering. And so I was like, you know, I feel like in the future, we would have gotten past that. But it's never in a, like, okay, that's not how the female body works. It's never in a, oh, of course you're describing that woman that way. Like, it's never that kind of annoying thing, unless, well, okay, Miller probably does. Because I'm pretty sure there were places where I was like, ugh, why are you paying this much attention to this part of her, sir? Why? But Miller is kind of insufferable in the books. I like him in the show, but in the books it's just like, oh man, Thomas Jane did a much better job of being a person than you are being right now, sir. I do suggest actually getting attached to the show first. I think they do a really good job of adapting the material that is in the books, and it is really fun to kind of be surprised by what actually happens in the books, and you get attached to the characters, and so you're not quite as annoyed with some of them, Miller, as you would be if you had not watched the show first. So those are my favorite books of 2020. These are the ones that have brought me the most joy that I discovered this year. Please let me know in the comments if you are feeling chatty. What have you discovered in 2020? What is one of your favorite books from this year? If you are not feeling chatty today, go ahead and just give me a star emoji to let me know that you made it to the end of the video. Or if you're feeling, a little bit more creative, give me the plot of your favorite book of the year in emojis, if you would like. You can try. I will probably not be able to figure it out, but I'll have fun trying to. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for making it all the way through these 12 days of Margaret. We will be back to your normal, regularly scheduled content after this. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, there will be other videos over here that you might enjoy. If you haven't seen my worst videos of the year, or worst books of the year yet, go ahead and check that one out. That is it for now, my friends. Happy reading, and I will see you later when we will talk about more wordy, nerdy things. Bye!